Hello, my name's Andrew Curtis from the Heddon Local History Society. I would like to thank Judith Green for inviting me to give this talk and the Newcastle Library Service for hosting it. Also, all the people and photographers whose work I have freely used to create it. I'm talking today about the western section of the River Tyne, shown on this map from 1670, from the Lytton Fill, I think. It shows the bounder stone, shown by the letter H here at Heddon, headwind streams in the west, as far as Newcastle in the east, although the subjects of my talk are all in the 2-mile section upriver from Newburn Bridge, somewhere here. The map, of course, shows the original course of the Tyne, including its several islands and the great meander through what is now Leamington Gut. At this point, the main subjects of the map are the many coal staiths along its banks, including one called Bohemia, located just west of Newburn, which I know nothing at all about. This is a view from just above my house in Heddon on the Wall and shows the same stretch of river. From here, we look east to Newburn Bridge. Just see it here in the river, with the glassworks cone at Leamington beyond. I'll tell you about the wrecks of the wherries close to Newburn Bridge, and another wreck just beyond the little ferry house, the white building visible below the spire of Ryton Church, the wreck of a steam drifter. I want to tell you something about the old Ryton ferry and the ferry house that used to be on the Ryton side of the river at Ryton Island down here. 3 people from Heddon were drowned in a ferry accident when crossing to Ryton railway station on the edge of Ryton Willows in March 1877. The river was originally tidal as far as the Tidestone at a small rapid called Headwind Streams. It was dredged and straightened and its banks strengthened at the end of the 1800s and is now tidal as far up as Wylam Bridge. I discovered these remains of wrecked boats in 2013. They had, of course, already been well discovered and expertly examined by those with much more knowledge than me. On the riverside mud lies this scatter of clearly boat-shaped oak woodwork, along with many iron and copper fixings. These are the remains of the Newburn wherries, and my information is largely taken from the excellent paper in AA by Alan Williams and Patrick Taylor, published in 2010. The reference is down here. At low tide, from the south side of the bridge, more boat-shaped remains can be seen in the mud, along with a scattered of broken woodwork dispersed by the constant flow of the river and its tides. This boat here, large, flat-bottomed barge, Newburn's Sutton Hoo ship burial. The wooden wherries were of clinker construction, overlapping planks sealed with caulking and fixed by copper nails and clenched by metal washers called rows. This is a very ancient boat boarding technique, certainly known to the Roman Navy, the Sutton Hoo ship and Viking longboats, and is still used for North Sea cobles. The keels and later wooden vessels were of carvel construction using end-butted planks, which are stronger and much easier to repair. The wherries were hulked at this location between 1940 and 1960 to remove them from the navigation channels downriver and to retrieve their valuable copper. This has left a scatter of wood and metal debris, much embedded in the mud of the riverbed. Beamish has a collection of photos showing several disused wooden vessels halt here around 1964. This photograph in the Newcastle Library's collection looks across to the Newburn side of the river, showing the boathouse pub with its river flood levels on the outside wall, and the clubhouse and landing stage of the Tyne Rowing Club to its left. South Shields Museum has this painting of a sail-equipped wherry at the Mill Dam. There'd be a large number of these vessels up and down the Tyne. They were the workhorse of the industry along the river banks. Many of the wherries were operated as unpowered trains towed behind a powered vessel. Later ones were steam or diesel powered, as here. Elsick No. 2 was built in 1939 at Bill Quay and was the last ferry to be constructed on the River Tyne. She was originally owned by Vickers Elsick Works within a fleet of wherries and passed to Keedy and Sons based at Tyne Dock. In 1976, she was donated to Tyne and Weir and is now held in the large objects store at Beamish, although not on view to the public. The opening line in Taylor and Williams' paper says it all. The commonplace can all too quickly become the rare, then the unique, and finally the non-existent. For instance, of the thousands of keels which ran on the Tyne ebb from upriver coal staiths beneath the arches of the old Newcastle Bridge and to waiting colliers, not a single example now remains. For the Wherry, that other ubiquitous, historic working boat of the River Tyne, this transition has been curtailed at the unique. Just one complete example, Elsick No. 2, survives at Beamish Museum in County Durham. An article in the Newcastle Chronicle, Tales from a Working River, in 2011, described the memories of William Gardner, who worked on the Tyne wherries until about 1926. He tells us that 2 keelmen worked on each wherry. There was a cabin into which they had to lower themselves with 2 bunks for sleeping, a fire and cooking utensils. A wherry could carry loads of 65 to 85 tons, and when fully loaded, the top of the craft would be only 18 inches above the water. Many frequently sank and had to be salvaged along with their cargo. There was a walkway 18 inches wide, only separated from the drop into the open hold by an 8-inch high batten. William Gardner's ferry operated from Cowan's Brickworks at Blaydon, from where fire bricks were sent all over the world. A full load of some 20,000 bricks was loaded and unloaded by hand. Not being local, this is a little beyond my linguistic ability, but I'll make the effort if you'll forgive me my mistakes. Tyneside seemed clad with bonny hars and furnaces, say Dunny. Why this mun be what Bible calls the land of milk and honey? If all tha things belonged to I, I'd make the poor eat murray, and cheer the folks he ganging by. I've Jemmy Joneson's worry. Sorry about that. This is the Tyne and Weir Museum Service information sheet about the last Tyne wherry, Elsick No. 2, which it calls a Tyneside descendant of the Viking ships. 2 nice illustrations on the right, the steam wherry and a sail wherry. This memory of Newburn was posted by Jimmy Burrows on the Francis Frith website in 2009. This is part of it. The old derelict timber structures on the bank opposite the Boathouse pub are almost gone now. But when I was a kid, these were full-size sea barges, maybe 2 or 3 roped together that were no longer seaworthy and were brought here to see their days out. We used to try and get on board, but there was a small hut on one and it had a little smoking chimney. This is where the watchman stayed, and when he chased us, we would go back and hoy a stone at the hut. I do remember seeing someone cover his little chimney with something and him running out, choking with a black face. This was a trick learned at the Imperial from one of the cowboy pictures. Leaving the wherries and travelling upriver beyond Ryton Willows and the Ferry house, there is another wreck, another wooden vessel, also on the Ryton shore. I photographed this in 2013 and realised from survey markers attached to the existing woodwork that I was again not the first to notice it. Unlike the wherries, she was of carvel construction like a keelboat and had a propeller shaft and a large wooden rudder. That's about as much as I would have ever found out on my own. The wreck had again been brought to the attention of the same Alan Williams and Patrick Taylor when they were recording the remains of the Wherry hulks just west of Newburn Bridge in 2009. It was them that established the vessel was carvel built and is the wreck of a steam drifter, a type of fishing boat in common use around the turn of the 20th century, often fishing for herring. There would be large numbers of them based at North Shields. Here's a painting of the wooden steam drifter Radiant in the Aberdeen Art Gallery. Lots more would be on the eastern coast of Scotland, to all the fishing ports. Like the Tyne wherries, very few steam drifters survive, and almost all of those have steel rather than wooden hulls. Alan Williams published a short account of the drifter in the Tyne Valley Express, asking readers for information, but very little was forthcoming. One source told him that she had been formerly used by the Sea Scouts as a headquarters, possibly based as a houseboat at Ryton Willows. He also gave me a reference to this wonderful book, From Tree to Sea by Ted Frost, The Building of a Wooden Steam Drifter, perhaps in the hope that I would want to construct a replica in my garage. Oh, only if I had the necessary skills. I posted a blog article on the steam drifter on the Heddon Local History website in March 2013. Someone called Arthur Newton contacted me 2 years later. He named the vessel as Reflect and confirmed the story about its purchase for the Sea Scouts. I did get back to him, but he would tell me little more, apart from that he still had her original nameplate. I made the connection with his surname Newton shortly after, but he wouldn't tell me anything more, and I could find no record of a fishing boat called Reflect or anything about its previous history. He did say that his father had bought the boat from Clayton and Davis shipbreakers at Dunstan in the early 1950s, but it was never made into a houseboat. 4 years later, 2019, completely out of the blue, I got a contact from Andrew Hall through the website with this detailed information. Okay, we don't get much traffic to our website, so it was probably lucky that he'd found it. He had been able to research a full history of the vessel. The drifter started her life in 1902 and was originally registered at Lowestoft as the Kessingland. She was requisitioned as a net-laying vessel in the First World War and then re-registered at Scarborough. In 1926, she was registered again in Lowestoft, renamed Reflect. and requisitioned as an examination vessel in the Second World War and returned to her owners in 1945 to be sold as scrap 2 years later. Here she was purchased by the first Tyne Sea Scouts, sailed to Ryton and sank before refitting as a houseboat. When you have a name, it provides the possibility of finding more, and amazingly, this painting came up for sale at the time from an online art seller. The Steam Drifter Kessingland, LT 210 Lowestoft, watercolour on paper by Perry Broad. A short note by the painter was attached to the painting, confirms the information provided by Andrew Hall. He calls it Hauling the Nets. It was painted in 1982. Presumably he wasn't aware that then she was sitting on the mud near Ryton. He wrote, Kessingland was typical of the classic steam drifter, built between 1900 and 1930 for drift net fishing of herring. Close-ups from the painting show the name Kessingland on the stern and the lifeboat of the vessel, and the Lowestoft registration number LT210 on her bow, and several of her crew wearing yellow sou'westers hauling the nets. The Lowestoft Research Society even has this photo of the later registered vessel LT294, then called Reflect. You can just make out the name painted on the bow, or the front as we call it. There were certainly houseboats on the riverside at Ryton Willows, as shown in this postcard from the early 1960s. The original correspondent who confirmed the story about the Sea Scouts was Arthur Newton. Was his father this man, Commander S.D. Newton, retired from the Royal Navy, also known as Uncle Newton, Scoutmaster of the first Tyne Sea Scouts? It seems likely, but Arthur was not forthcoming. S.D. Newton was a founding member of the Royal Northumberland Yacht Club, from where I acquired this photo. The yacht club would hold regular regattas on this narrow section of the river at Ryton, possibly using the boathouse of the Ryton Rowing Club, which stood more or less where the ferry house is today. The bottom photo here is a view of the boats of the Ryton Ferry from the original ferry house on Ryton Island, on the north bank of the river. I'll show you this shortly. Here's a postcard from a photograph by Ryton WI showing yachts sailing at Ryton Willows, one of the yacht club regattas. A little further upriver from the steam drifter is of course the Tidestone. It has the Newcastle Three Castles emblem, and above that the year 1783. We're looking over the fields to the current farmhouse of Heddon Hoff's farm, which was formerly the station master's house at Heddon Railway Station. William Hall was the station master here between 1898 and 1906, and he planted 13 trees at the station, one for each of his children. You can still just about count 13 sycamore trees, now mature, along the site of the former Newcastle-bound platform. Some notes here about the Tidestone and the annual Ascension Day ceremony. The Corporation of Newcastle used to survey the bounds from Tynemouth to the stone at headwind streams in their barge every Ascension Day. Heddon locals used to know it as the Kissing Stone, because here the Mayor of Newcastle would kiss who he judged to be the prettiest Heddon girl. And it is alleged that this ritual was stopped when it was realised that he was selecting his own relatives. The last annual survey was in 1851. Afterwards it was made every 5 years, and then by the Tyne Improvement Commission every 7. The ceremony was also known as Barge Day, And many of you will of course know this painting from the Lang Art Gallery by Ralph Hedley in 1891. There is an account of a much earlier ceremony at the Tidestone in 1818. The River Jury proceeded to headwind streams 2 miles above Newburn, and as the river is shallow at this spot, the whole party was necessitated to walk, which it did in excellent order and to the harmony of many musicians. On arriving at headwind streams, they took formal possession of their boundary stone as the mark of their utmost jurisdiction westward. Mr. Ossel, the harbour master, an individual of considerable proportions, with the help of the bargeman, placed himself on the top of the stone with a glass of wine in his hand and made a speech. The address was warmly cheered, while the pit lads began to fire off some cannon, the band to play, and bottles of wine to empty their exhilarating contents. Spontaneous dancing began. The Cat House, a cottage a little distance from the boundary stone, was inhabited by a gentlewoman whose face bore evident marks of acquaintance with the middle of the last century. She appeared at her door to greet the party in a silk frock and diminutive lace cap. She was plentifully regaled with wine, for which she returned a flood of compliments, and then modestly intimated to the bottle holder that it was customary for the empty bottle to be left at her house, and it was a pity to let such good old customs go down. The Tidestone can be seen on this section of the Ordnance Survey 25-inch map from 1898, with Heddon Station on the Scotswood Loop behind. The wood behind the stone, running up to the railway line from the river, is still named Cat House Plantation, but the cottage is long gone. The map clearly shows a short branch railway line, still seen today, running from the triangular junction below Heddon Colliery here, down to the riverbank, close to the Tidestone. I call this the Headwind Streams Railway. The river was first dredged by Joseph Cowan in 1873. Between 1898 and 1912, the course of the river was straightened and its banks strengthened to prevent floods. This was the work of the Tyne Improvement Commission. This photo shows the wrought iron screen covering the fanlight above the door of their former building, Buick House in Newcastle. It shows the coat of arms of the Improvement Commission, made up of the 3 castles motif of Newcastle, the single castle of Gateshead, the 3 crowns of Tynemouth, and the lifeboat of South Shields. The 2 prominent sprigs of vegetation represent sea purslane, a rare plant of the Northumberland salt marshes. In 1911, a railway track laid across the shallow bed of the river was used to transport iron slag from Spencer's Ironworks in Newburn and used to reinforce the riverbanks. This was the course of the Headwind Streams Railway. Sidings were laid as required on both sides of the river and across its bed. The photo here from Roger Darsley's book on Newcastle to Hexham railway line shows a set of 4 side-tipping wagons being hauled across to the Ryton side, where a locomotive, probably a Manning Wardle, is waiting on the 30th of May, 1911. Probably taken around the same time is this glass plate negative, collected by prolific local photographer W.A. Cox of Ryton. It was taken from the spire of Holy Cross Church and looks out across the river towards Blaney Row. A line of dredgers can be seen along this stretch of the river, and it's then almost treeless and strengthen the banks. Blaney Row here was built for the employees of Heddon Brickworks by Cadwallader Bates of Heddon Hall in 1889 and sold to the Throckley Coal Company in 1895. Beyond the row, you can see Throckley Isabella Colliery with a little steam engine puffing along its branch line, which joined the main line running in front of Blaney Row here, joining the branch line near Newburn. This section of the second edition Ordnance Survey map shows the area around Ryton Island. Here's Blaney Row again, Heddon Station, Moor Court, Ryton Island. Although now on the north side of the river, Ryton Island was at one time in the parish of Ryton in Durham, an anomaly due to a change in the course of the river. An old fish weir is shown south of the island. In 1800, 1,600 salmon were caught between Newburn and Scotswood Bridge on one tide. These were sold in the Sandhill Fish Market in Newcastle. Island House is shown on Ryton Island and the course of the ferry, running from there to a location west of the boathouse on the south side of the river. That's the same boathouse I showed you photographs of earlier. It stood close to where the ferry house is today, at the railway crossing below River Lane. Here's River Lane, here's the Ryton Church. The map shows the Newcastle to Carlisle Railway on the south side of the river, which opened in 1839. Ryton Station here, on the edge of Ryton Willows, was closed to passengers in 1954. On the north side of the river, following what was then, what had been the Wylam Wagonway, is the North Wylam, Heddon, Newburn, Leamington and Scotswood line, which opened in 1876 and closed to passenger traffic in 1968. William Bourne in 1896 sings the praises of this section of the river. He tells us, although the boatman's house is at the north side of the river, it is in the parish of Ryton, the boundary line being immediately behind the house. The river has evidently changed its course at a time not very remote. Old inhabitants of the villages in the neighbourhood affirm that 60 years ago, traces of the former course of the stream were plainly discernible. Sykes informs us that formerly tremendous floods frequently caused the river to overflow its banks, the waters bearing destruction to the low-lying grounds adjoining the river. In the Great Flood of 1771, Joseph Foster, the ferryman at Ryton, had to escape from a window in the second story of the old house to a boat sent to his rescue. Gateshead Libraries have this lovely photograph of the Ryton ferry in operation around 1900, showing the ferry house on the north bank, Ryton Island. The ferryman is named as Archie Scott. A newspaper article was written about the ferryman Joe Scott, Archie's son, in 1929 when he was age 79. It's titled 65 Years on a Ferry Boat. The old ferry boat at Ryton Willows still crosses the Tyne when required, but Mr. Joe Scott, who has spent the last 65 years in sculling passengers to and fro, finds he has little to do nowadays, especially in winter. More than 40 years ago, he told a reporter, before the railways on the Northumberland side were laid, things were very different. The only way folks from Heddon and Throckley could get into Newcastle then was from Ryton railway station, and they used to cross over in droves. Joe Scott tells about the big flood on the River Tyne, which took place 22 years ago, 1907, which washed away the house he had built on the northern bank. A new one, the White Ferry House, was built on the south side of the river, close to the railway where it stands today. Ryton Ferry had been owned by Joe's grandfather as far back as 1830. His father, Archie, was born in Newburn in 1828, and you can find him listed in the census results as a salmon fisherman or ferryman. He died in 1905. At 8 in the morning, on Monday, the 26th of March, 1877, there was a ferry accident and 3 people from Heddon were drowned. These were John Moore, Mary Dale, and Elizabeth Veach, all crossing the morning ferry to catch the train to Newcastle from Ryton station. The account tells us the following. The boat plies between Heddon and Ryton and is propelled by a wire rope stretching from one bank to the other. The ferryman, Alexander, presumably Archie, newspapers haven't changed, Alexander Scott and 3 passengers had reached the Ryton bank across a river badly swollen by recent rain. The boat was swamped and all 4 pitched into the water. Scott was pulled to safety by a plate layer who happened to be standing on the bank. The boatman's dog was seen swimming strongly from the north bank, took hold of Elizabeth Veach and managed by extraordinary exertion to bring her ashore, a 1/4 of a mile downriver at Ryton Willows, where she was found to be dead. The bodies of the other 2 took much longer to be recovered. Elizabeth Veach, age 38, was buried on the 29th of March, 1877. Mary Ann Dale, 27th of May. This is her gravestone in the graveyard of St Andrew's Church in Heddon. John Moore, 40, was buried on the 22nd of August, some 5 months after the accident. Gateshead Libraries have a few more photos of the old ferry house on Ryton Island, clearly an idyllic spot. This one looking over from the south bank, and these 2 taken from the north bank. His washings hanging on a line here. As I walk down across Ryton Island these days, I see an old Victoria plum tree sitting in the middle of the wasteland. It always bears a few plums, and I always think it might have been in the Scots garden, but I can't be sure. Chris Richardson sent me this, which shows the badly damaged ferry house taken just after the flood, which destroyed the house on Ryton Island in 1907. Looks a bit like a school outing. You can see the river on the right and the collapsed side of the house here. Before it was deepened, the river could be crossed at several places by ford, often where the riverbed was stony, called by the local name Stanners. There were several such fords in the vicinity of Newburn and one across the river below Close House, which was known as Stanner Ford. Whenever I'm walking down there and the river level is low, I often imagine being able to cross with dry feet, using the Thomas Buick method of the long-legged plover. Perhaps one day I'll try. Thank you for listening to my talk.